Thanks for joining us again. Go ahead and declare the budget hearing to begin. And we'll go ahead and start with Carrie Deaver.
Good morning. The first agenda item for you on the budget hearing is to talk about the elected official salaries. Just a reminder, this is for budget purposes only. Elected official salaries, as well as the base salary you would pay for any newly elected official, is set through resolution each December. For that reason, I did include a new attachment for you. This first item is just a reflection of what the base salaries are for 2020 that you set by resolution, and then what the actual 2020 salaries are. And then the next two attachments are the same that you've seen at previous budget hearings. This is the summary data showing the salaries for elected officials compared to market data, and a comparison of where they are compared to their deputy director or their assistant director. And just a reminder that this is 2020 salaries. Of course, other entities are doing this process as well, and we'll be making adjustments so they will go up for next year. The third page for you is a salary listing with other department heads, so you can compare for equity purposes. And the last attachment is new. I just gave you some examples of 1, 2, 3, up to 5% increases in case that's helpful to you during your discussions. Any questions?
Questions for Carrie? I know last year, which was a different budget year, we elected to defer elected official salaries until towards the end of the year. I personally don't see a reason to do that this year, but I'm open to that if somebody has thoughts about that. If you're willing to go ahead and set those now, I'd be open to discussion.
We have two positions that were, the state's attorney's office. We have a new state's attorney coming in. We have a treasurer has an election. I'm throwing out for conversation only because I don't know where I'm at on it, but do we want to leave those salaries where they are this year, not knowing where we're going next year?
You talking the base salary or the current salary?
The current salary.
Current salary.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Barth.
Commissioner Heiberger brings up a great point, and I think we've touched on this idea in the past that, when you replace a 30-year employee with a brand new person off the street, do they walk in at the rate of someone with 30 years of seniority, or do they take a step back and then earn their way up to 30 years after another 29. Anyway, I think that there is not unreasonable reasons to pay a new elected official less than an incumbent.
And I don't know if Carrie wants to come up and address that, but I know in the past we've already set base salaries for new elected officials.
Right, that's a good point. So again, the actual salaries, what you're doing today is just budget. That'll give us a figure to put in for budget. The actual salaries will be set for everybody in December. And we did set with that thought in mind of, how are we going to handle that if we have a newly elected individual, and knowing that we had elections coming up. Our resolution for 2020 did include the very base amount that you would pay for anybody in that office. And that's the $130 for state's attorney, the $103 for sheriff, and then the $84,927 for the auditor, treasurer, and register of deeds. And just to give you some perspective, that $84,927 is the same base salary as our other department heads at a pay grade 24. So that's the thought process behind that. So in December, you can set, if there are newly elected individuals, you can go ahead and set their salaries. Right now, you've said, though, that this would be the base amount that you would pay. Does that help clarify?
I think so. Thank you,
Okay,
Commissioner
thanks.
Karski.
What about in the event where, say, an elected official resigns? Are we then stuck to the salary that we approved, or can we go back to the base? or somewhere in between?
If you have, for example, somebody who's earning 90,000, so they're above that base salary, and you have a newly elected individual, you could go back to that 84,927, absolutely. So you won't actually set the salary for elected officials until December.
Okay, I'm talking midterm, say say June of, midterm of an election.
Yep.
Where somebody new comes in, the commission has to appoint a new elected official to a
Yep.
position.
You'd be using the base salary here, the 84,927 for those three positions, or the 130 or the 103. And we did have it open-ended before. It was a struggle, so what we tried to do is set up a base salary as a bare minimum of what we would pay a newly elected official.
Couldn't remember what we did with the state's attorney with the midterm thing just in the last year, I guess.
Yeah, right, yep, we have looked at that, but we set it at the 130.
Okay.
Commissioner Heiberger.
I'm looking at this, and maybe I'm on the wrong page, but so what was the base salary for, it would be the treasurer's office and registers of deeds? Is it that 96? Or, because you were saying 78, so I'm not quite sure what the.
It's on the very first attachment,
This-
that it's 84,927 is the very minimum we would pay. And it was set up to correspond to other department heads.
That one.
Okay, I
So-
don't have this one, okay.
Some rhyme or logic behind that.
Madam Chairman, I have one more question.
Commissioner Heiberger.
So I'm wondering about direction, since we don't really know what we're doing until December when we set the wages. Can we just set aside a amount of money for the budget and then make those decisions in December? Is that what we're doing, or are we figuring a percentage
We
rate
could
at the
do that,
minimum?
which is what we did last year. We could delay this until, just as the first meeting in December, that we could delay it and then set those salaries at that time.
That's right. And I think last year it was more open-ended because of where you were at with the budget, if I recall correctly. In years prior to that, I mean, it's a difficult conversation. You know it's going to change if you have a newly elected official, and you'll have another opportunity to talk about it in December. But for your other elected officials, generally what you've done in the past is had that conversation during the budget process, so you had a fairly accurate number. And by the time we got to December, then it was just approving the number you'd approved during the budget. But either approach works.
Commissioner Barth.
I think we should, for budgetary purposes, just pencil in 2% across the board, and we can always make a different decision in December, or in our case, January.
Is there,
I think I'm okay with that, because that's not what our decision would be, it'd just be a budgetary number. What would that,
kind of a placeholder?
right, what would that?
2%?
What would 2% be? 12,424. I'm okay with that.
Any other comments? I see a lot of shaking heads. Anybody opposed to that idea?
I think we should put another 12,000 in for whoever is our chairperson next year.
All right. I think we'll go with that then. We'll put a 2% placeholder for each elected office, and then we will revisit that the first commission meeting in December. Okay. Yeah.
Good morning, Commissioners. Next, we're going to just review where we left things off after the last budget hearing on June 16th. So if you recall, we had a preliminary budget, revenues of $65,707,352. If we apply the 5% reserve required by statute, our net means of finance was $62,370,000. We had requested appropriations of $66,744,000, putting us at a cash applied factor of $4.3 million, almost $4.4 million. At that time, we discussed the recommendation of using an 8% cash applied benchmark, which left us $965,000 available for additional budget adjustments. Then during the hearings, we did identify some of those adjustments. At this time, we don't have any adjustments to our revenues, but we do have a list of adjustments, which I'm not going to go through in detail right now because later in our agenda, we're going to go back and revisit all of these items. but these adjustments totaled about $770,000. So if you look at the adjustment column then, that's going to bring our if all these adjustments are adopted for the budget, our new cash applied number would be $5,182,000, still below that 8% cash applied benchmark that we discussed at the hearing.
Questions for Kim?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Barth?
And so with that 8%, then we don't need to take additional from our opt-out.
That's correct. Our budgeted revenues at this time assume the same opt-out level as 2020.
I think it's important for the citizens to recognize that we are living reasonably frugally on this and not maximizing our potential revenue there.
Correct.
Any other questions for Kim? I'd say it's generally good news.
Okay.
All right. So that takes us to highway. Does it take us to highway? Okay. Didn't want to kick you out if there's more that you were supposed to talk about, sorry. All right. PJ, I think we all got some updated numbers from you.
There should be a spreadsheet that was handed out.
One-handed, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the 2 weeks since the last budget hearing have been kind of a long 2 weeks. Kim had asked a question after, I think, the last budget hearing, or right before the last budget hearing, that had caused me to review my budget projection, which is that spreadsheet that you all have in front of you. And ultimately, I found 2 errors in my spreadsheet that are used to generate projected fund balances. A spreadsheet had been referencing a contracted construction project summary spreadsheet that was no longer being updated. We had changed the file name, and so there was a link in the spreadsheet that wasn't correct. And so it was referencing outdated information. Additionally, the spreadsheet had a cell with a math error in it. Along with my spreadsheet errors, we had seen a significant decrease in the wheel tax and motor vehicle fee revenues through April and May. Those were related to the closure of the treasurer's office. In addition to the spreadsheet errors and revenue drops, we had some project issues this year. First, the County Highway 146 project was bid over the engineer's estimate and over the budget. The budget, which was originally programmed for 2 budget years instead of a single budget year that was actually bid for. And then secondly, we had a flooding last year that we experienced that caused us to increase the scope of our culvert project to replace failed culverts. So for the last 2 weeks, we've been working hard to revise these budget numbers, develop an acceptable cash flow and end-of-year fund balance. Jean and Kim and Carol have been a great help in that effort. The spreadsheet provided to you for today's meeting shows a revised budget, and a summary of the major changes are as follows. Contractors working on 3 current projects, the 146 reconstruction and 2 culvert projects that we have. All 3 of those contractors have agreed to work with us on the phasing of their work and the completion dates to move some of that work into 2021. We've had savings on our mill and overlay contract of about $300,000 because the material quantity calculation that was put into the plans versus what's being used in the field is the field quantity is quite a bit less than what was planned for, so that's about $300,000 in savings. And then the requested equipment purchases have been removed from the 2021 budget, and the remaining of the 2020 planned purchases have been removed also. There's one exception to this. The 2 plow truck chassis that were budgeted for have already been purchased, and they're being made right now. And so there's approximately $250,000 remaining to complete the builds of these truck bodies, and it's expected that the expense for those will be incurred in January of 2021. The travel training budgets have been significantly reduced, but not eliminated due to continuing education requirements. The amount of planned asphalt purchase in the future has been reduced. This is an allowable decrease in planned maintenance because of the good condition of our roadways. In lieu of the more expensive maintenance projects, maintenance crews will focus on less costly projects such as ditch cleanouts and roadway shouldering. 2 bridge projects were awarded last week with a grant, and that totaled about $890,000 worth of project cost. We were able to pull those out. The matching will be approximately $53,000 over the next 3 years. And then along with that program, there were a total of 49 bridge awards throughout the state. Many of those bridges are applied for the Bridge Improvement Grant Program through the DOT. This additional grant program will free up a lot of capacity in the Bridge Improvement Grant Program, so we're expected to receive some additional grants this fall through the Bridge Improvement Grant. These budget modifications have resulted in a projected end-of-year fund balance of just over $2.1 million for 2020 and an estimated budget supplement from the highway fund reserves of $2.7 million. That end-of-year number can go down if we're diligent on spending the rest of the year, which will cause our budget supplement request to decrease. I'll stand by for any questions.
Questions for DJ? That people are looking at. Commissioner Benninga.
I just have some line item questions, if you got a second, DJ. In expenditures, we've eliminated administrative support on the next 21-22 projected budget. How are you gonna be able to do that?
That's a good question for Kim.
Are we getting rid of Kim?
Oh.
That is that's simply a change in where we're classifying those costs. We've created a budget up and reimbursed salaries for those items because what was going to that budget line is basically an allocation from the state's attorney's office, auditors, human resources, and commission offices for services to support the highway department. And in all of our other departments where we're doing allocations between departments, we're using the salary reimbursements budget line. So it's just a shift from administrative costs up to salary reimbursements.
But is that then changing the general fund responsibilities of the
No.
other departments?
No.
Okay. Then the other one that I have some question about is on the second page, architectural and engineer cost, utility alignment, and contracted construction. I mean, there's some dramatic changes on those. Can you explain those?
Big picture, it's because we have a really high project load right now, and we have a lot of contracts under construction and are under work right now. And so those will continue through 2021, so we won't be using new contracts for those. They're going to be either carried over or they're already encumbered. And then the architects, engineers only has $60,000 for 2021. A lot of the work that we're going to be doing for next year is going to be grant work.
So how much work in progress did we carry over from last year to this year?
The carryover supplements, that was about 3.4 million.
3.4, is that right?
But over $1 million of that was in the utilities.
Utility.
That makes more sense.
And so the reason that we have really large numbers on the utility alignment is because of that County Highway 146 reconstruction project. We had to redo 2 long utility lines that were really expensive, and that's not a typical expense that we see on most of our reconstruction projects. Our next reconstruction project is North County Highway 149. The estimated utility relocations for that is only $75,000. And our engineer has been working with the electric and water utilities to develop those costs.
Do you keep a supplemental schedule of what you think the construction cost projections are gonna be and how that's gonna change some of these projects if they get moved back or whatever, based on frankly cash available?
We do, and that's the spreadsheet link that I talked about that was not linked up correctly. That spreadsheet is usually updated every time we have new project costs. And we had a file save as with a different file name, and so this spreadsheet, which tracks those costs, was referencing outdated data.
I think it would be important, at least for me, to see that once in a while. I'm sure other commissioners would like to see it also, just from the standpoint of people ask about specific projects, we can tell them where they're at in the schedule and what the estimated time frame and cost is.
I think that's a good idea. One of the ideas that Commissioner Bender had was working with IT to develop some sort of a program that, instead of using a spreadsheet that introduces human error, develop a program that sources data directly from Munis. We input project information into that program, and it provides the cash flow for us. And we could probably easily make a report based out of that program for the commission, for the highway department.
You know, I think in at least my experience, I always look at the cash available versus budget projections. I mean, that's funny money compared to real money. So that would be very helpful.
Comments, questions?
Gerald stole my thunder.
Well, obviously, this was, has been a couple of difficult weeks for DJ, and, but they have worked really hard and found a lot of savings. And we're gonna work on process to look to see what solutions there are to help make sure it doesn't happen in the future. And, but I think we've, through a couple weeks of hard work, they've come up with a workable budget. Anything else? All right, thank you, DJ.
Thank
Oh,
you.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Karski.
I'm sorry, just came to mind. Is there any statutory guidance on what your end of your fund balance has to be in relation to the projects that are going on? As far as a required minimum or anything like that?
Not to my knowledge, there's no statutory requirements on end of your fund balance. There would be a statutory requirement that you can't, maybe Kim has something to add to this too, but you can't over encumber your cash balance. And you have to have the cash that you encumber projects. And so that's one of the reasons that we were having to look at what our end of your fund balance is, so we don't mess up a cash flow and have a negative dollar amount.
Okay.
I think when we talked, our goal is to have the end of the year fund balance in the high twos, $3 million range is our goal. And
Right.
Kim felt comfortable with that goal.
$2 to $3 million, and that provides for enough cushion if we did have emergencies come up, we would be able to have the cash on hand to do a supplement and take care of the emergency.
Okay.
Commissioner Heiberger?
I'm just thinking back, Gerald, and your memory's probably better than mine in this, but I think we talked about, and I know this is an unusual year, that we had a minimum that we thought as a commission that we should have as a fund balance for the highway department, but did we ever come up with a number? Because I remember this conversation. That was actually almost going to be my question that Dean asked, because we had this conversation quite a few years ago. I think since
can
you've
add to
come,
that.
DJ, did we ever come up with an actual number, target number as to what we wanted for a minimum cash balance? Because
There was a suggested reserve target of 30% of our regular non-federal revenues. And so in this spreadsheet, we do have a line, it's hidden on this report, but we do have a line that calculates that based off of our revenues. And now our revenues are high enough that 30%, I think, is $3 to $4 million.
okay, that's kind of where I was thinking that we were at. Obviously, we didn't make that this year, but I'll work towards going back there.
Right. We'll definitely work towards getting back there. In that conversation, it was never set as policy, it was just more of a guidance.
Could we unmask that item?
Well,
so
he
we
has
know
it
where
in
should
his
be?
report. He just didn't show it to us
On this.
today in this report.
Okay.
So,
It'd be nice to know where you are in relation to it, so.
In the report that we prepare for using this program that we're gonna end up generating, we'll make sure that that's part of it.
Okay.
say that Kim because the revenues have gotten so much higher, Kim is comfortable with a goal closer to 25%, is what she was saying in our conversations, just based on on the amount of revenues that we now have. But I don't know if you want to speak to that, Kim?
Well, I was just explaining to DJ that based on the revised budget request, it's going to put the cash reserve at about low 20%, 21%. And that assumes that we would move the 1.6 million of jurisdictional transfer money over to the building fund. That is, we could keep that in the highway fund to bolster that reserve as well, but we've in the past talked about using that money as a source of revenue for the capital projects that are proposed for the highway department. So that is a decision point for you to make at some point in the future. We can budget that we'll transfer it, and until we have an official action from this commission, we won't complete that transfer. That will be at your direction when we get further into the capital project.
Commissioner Benega?
I like your suggestion. I think that's, frankly, there's no benefit for us to move that financially.
Right.
And if we leave it where it is, we can use it as needed versus being stuck on the percentage or the minimum value, if you will. Because I remember that conversation that Cindy was talking about. And it seems to me we talked about a dollar amount or a percentage, and we didn't make it a resolution because we wanted some flexibility. And I think this gives us the flexibility to do that and still maintain the reasonable cash that we may or may not need.
So is your direction to budget for the transfer and then just address it further on, or do you not even want to budget for the transfer at this point?
I think I'd like to see it identified before we transfer it with some project allocation, so to speak. And if we think we're going to get some of that spent in 2021, then we have to budget for it. Does that make sense?
Well,
Does the-
yes, that will all depend on the timing of a bond
Right.
issue and
Exactly.
and we will be addressing a lot of these matters in our building committee meeting on the 7th. We'll have some more, we've got some further guidance on bonding.
Does the 2.4 million on the 2021 budgeted mean that transfer was done or was not done?
Yes,
It was
that's,
done.
that's
Okay.
assuming the transfer is done.
Okay.
If we leave that 1.6 million in the highway fund, we would have an ending cash balance of 4 million.
Okay, thank you.
So I think, I mean, if I'm hearing Commissioner Benega correctly, that we can leave it budgeted for right now, but that we will revisit that as we work through the bonding issue.
Right,
Does that make sense?
Took the words right out of my mouth.
okay. Great.
Here is my second profession. All right. DJ, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
No.
I know you're anxiously anticipating coming here, so I'd imagine you want to stay up there as long as possible. All right.
Give me the chance to give an update, and I apologize that this happened under my watch. It's not a fun presentation to have to give, but we're working on solutions.
All right. Well, we
We've
appreciate
all
it.
been there.
Glad this isn't next year when it really is an issue. We can actually fix this year, so don't sweat it too much. We figured it out.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that takes us to a continuation of discussion deliberation from June 16th, and we start with the building fund, unless. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm okay moving Carl up. We're glad Carl's here. Thanks, Carl. So Carl is here to talk about the courts, which I'm trying to see where that is on the agenda, but
It's not on.
outside agencies, there we go. All right.
Morning, Commissioners. Judge Hammond and I listened to the budget briefing, I believe, on June 15th, and we understand you'd like to discuss, or I'd appreciate this opportunity to respond to a question as to why, if the court's caseload is up, is revenue down and expenses are up. And if I were in your seat, I'd wonder the same thing. Do you happen to have my charts in front of you, or should I? Okay. Do I need to bring it up, do you think, or can we just roll on? Just roll. Okay. I'll just go through the charts really quickly, unless your preference, Madam Chair, is that we leap into Q and A.
No, go
whatever
ahead
your
and go
pleasure
through your
might be.
charts. I think you guys,
Yep.
there's lots of good information in there, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
As you'll see from the chart, of our overall caseload, it's actually down. But that decline is almost entirely due to high-volume traffic tickets. That total caseload chart is useful for court managers like me when we're trying to track court staff workload and those sorts of things, but it's a very blunt measure. It combines traffic tickets with murder cases, for example, and so it's of limited use. So our entire caseload is actually down. If you look at some other case types also, and we gave you, for example, family and child support, DIV cases and REC, which in South Dakota is called reciprocal cases, child support, you'll see that's substantially down. Now, that's a good example of how the county does get a portion of the initial filing fee, but then thereafter, these cases can stay alive for years, as we all know. Parents can fight over who pays for a child's preschool daycare all the way till who pays for Johnny's college. And so the county gets a small portion of the filing fee in these cases, but then it presents a workload for years to the court. On the other hand, it doesn't necessarily, divorce cases don't cost the county very much either, but it's a low revenue, low cost case area that's actually declining. And this decline contributes to our overall caseload decline as well.
Can I ask a question about that particular slide?
Yes, absolutely, Commissioner Heiberger, sorry.
So, I mean, I read through this the other day, and I mean, that's just like stark. It's gone down from 3,400 down to 1,155 total cases. So my question would be, and maybe we don't have an answer to this, are you seeing less divorces in Minnehaha and Lincoln County, or are we just seeing more where they're figuring out their settlements outside of court and doing them in a lawyer's office or doing them in their own house and just figuring it out so they stay out of court?
That's part of it. You know, there's been a big push on mediation in the last few years, so I think that's part of it. I think probably and I know this is a detour if I could
that's
for
fine.
just a minute,
You-
because
yeah.
it doesn't have anything to do with revenue, but it's a really interesting case shift as time goes by. And thank you for bringing this up. Generally, the judges and court managers have the impression that some of it's mediation, but it's more attributable to never marrieds.
Oh, I wondered that too.
Because when never married parents are litigating custody and visitation, it's filed as a general civil case.
Okay.
It's not a DIV because there's no divorce to determine. And so I think that's probably part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Now, in contrast, we'll go to the mental illness cases. I'm sorry. Mental illness cases, I mean, it's a relatively small portion of our caseload numerically. It's just a few hundred cases, or,
Oh, okay, there
Thank
you
you.
go.
thanks, Carol. But this is a perfect example of the answer to the question as to why, if caseload is rising so high in so many areas, why isn't revenue rising too? As you all know, many mental illness cases are terribly expensive and produce no revenue for the county. But that's the trend in mental illness cases. And you can see why that dynamic of, okay, if your caseload is up and up and up, why doesn't revenue creep up too? That's a perfect example, mental illness cases. And then, felonies are in there too. Huge increase in felonies, as you all know, and we've presented that chart a number of times to you. Very expensive case type, relatively little revenue to the counties. Now, if I were a county commissioner, I would wonder, well, felonies are going up, but wouldn't fines and fees go up as well? Remember, there's a sort of a counteracting dynamic here. The county and the court, a few years ago, as you all know, entered into a pretrial assessment program where pretrial risk assessments would be done on defendants. We can assume that to some degree that's going to lower jail days and save the county some number of jail days if defendants are released who are determined to be low risk. On the other hand, there's a dynamic with the money that occurs there. In the past, when monetary bail was more heavily used, a typical outcome of a case would be you'd use the money that was posted for bail, apply it to the fines and fees, and close the case. Well, now that monetary bail is applied less often, there's nothing there to forfeit. And so there's sort of a cost to the savings in jail days, but of course, those are two different pots of money. And so we believe that dynamic is at work too. I might mention one other thing, as we mentioned in the narrative, in the memo. In South Dakota, forfeitures of corporate bond, bail bonds, are pursued by the state's attorney's office. Now, typically, and it's not just here, I think it's a trend statewide. State's attorney's offices tend to concentrate on the active case, pursuing active cases, rather than sort of a financial transaction trying to get bail bond money from bondsmen. And then there's always, in a court as big as ours, there's always an issue of, okay, how do we get the data? How does the state's attorney's office determine which cases to pursue? How hard are they going to litigate it? Because, of course, the bonding companies often resist having to make payments on bond forfeitures. And so we don't have a clear sense of whether the state's attorney's office has the capacity to pursue them more aggressively. But we can generate all kinds of reports to assist in that if that's an area that commissioners would like to look at.
Commissioner Karski.
Those bail bonds, are they under forfeitures or cash fees on your chart?
I'm sorry.
Roll up to your court's revenue?
Those would be under forfeitures, Commissioner.
Those are the forfeitures. Okay,
Right.
so I've been reading on this, and it puzzles me, because if somebody goes to one of the corporate bonding companies or bail bondsmen, they pay a fee. And if they fail to appear, or if they have to forfeit that, the bonding company should be paying the courts that, correct?
And we'd relay it to the county.
And we're not collecting on that, so the bonding company's getting a free ride? I mean, because they're collecting money from that person who pays the bonding fee, but the county isn't trying to collect on that bail bond? Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't know that it's that they're not trying. I think that the state's attorney's office has provided a little information on this to me, and it is that it's difficult sometimes to collect from the bailsmen. There are a lot of, like anything, there's a lot of factors at play. Part of it is caseload and, trying to figure out where's the best place to put their time when they're also carrying a criminal time, but that it's difficult. The bailsmen aren't, it's the knock that insurance companies have sometimes, is that they're in the business to accept premiums and not so much to pay out claims, and I think it's a similar dynamic sometimes. So
I'm not blaming the state's attorney's office, but I'm looking at, I think the bail bonding companies are getting a free ride. I mean, because obviously they're not forthcoming with the money. They're fighting tooth and nail to have to pay it.
They do actively resist the collection.
Yeah.
That's wrong.
Just doesn't seem right.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that response, because that would have been mine as well.
I asked Carl, how much do you think we're leaving on the table there? I remember a case where there was a famous football player's child was murdered, and there was it $1 million bond? $2 million?
It was a $2 million bond.
And we never got it, did we?
Actually, that was a Lincoln County case, and
Oh.
the state's attorney, you have an excellent memory to remember that one, and it crossed my mind to mention it here because that's sort of a good example of what we're talking about. That was a Lincoln County case, but if you remember, the defendant failed to comply with the terms
Right.
of the release on a $2 million bond, and the state's attorney's office in Lincoln County negotiated a 50% forfeiture. So Lincoln County got half of it, and the other half was exonerated.
Was that a well-known bondsman in that case?
I think it was at the time. I mean, it did, and we're not talking about inside baseball here. I mean, that made the newspapers at the time.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, of course, there aren't many in this community, so.
sure.
but
Do you
it-
have any
it-
idea
as
how
we
much we're
point out,
leaving on the
it's a-
table?
It's a system that could use some improvement.
I can certainly get that for you, Commissioner.
All right, other questions for Carl? Once again, you provided a lot of excellent information.
Thank you. Thanks for the
Your
opportunity.
graphs are always very
Thank you.
helpful. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
You know, I
Commissioner
just
Barth.
remember Gordy Swanson made a special effort to try to collect those bonds, and before he made that effort, I think there was no effort made to collect. And he was pretty proud of roping in a bunch of those funds. And I think after he beat them a few times, they started voluntarily bringing it in as opposed to resisting.
If I may, Commissioner,
Absolutely.
very briefly, you do have an excellent memory, Commissioner, because at the time of Gordy Swanson's sort of campaign to improve collections, you may remember too that some of the bonding companies, when they were pressed to write the checks for those forfeitures that had already been ordered, they closed and disappeared. So it was a productive campaign for a while.
All right, thank you. All right, so now we will move back to item 4A, well, C, 4C on our agenda, which is, we'll start with the building fund, Kim.
I'm going to back up to a slide from our June 15th hearing. So let me find it, and then I can direct you to find it as well if you want to follow along.
Which slide are you looking for, Kim, so we could?
The building fund, it's going to be in the budget overview, item 2, budget overview. And it's going to be, oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong one. It's going to be in the other requests, budget overview, other requests. And, let's see. It's slide number 7 and 8, actually, or 6 and 7. I think I'm just going to jump to slide number 7, which is really just a summary of what we've got budgeted in our building fund at this point. And so if the 2021 proposed budget is the second column on this schedule, and we've got projected revenues of $4.5 million. We've got cash projects of $2.4 million. And if you recall, there are a couple big ticket items on that list, including a Sally Port at the JDC facility and also some FF&E for the admin and extension building remodel project. In addition to that, this request or proposed budget includes the cost to the debt service for a new $20 million bond issue. We have debt service on our existing debt in the building fund, some administrative fees for total costs of $3.9 million. A net surplus projected at just over $500,000, which would bring our ending cash to $2.6 million. Now, we did just a few minutes ago talk about doing a budgeted transfer from the highway fund of $1.6 million, so that would simply add to this bottom line, putting our building fund cash at a little over $4 million, $4.2 million, if you proceed with that transfer. But again, that's something you can discuss as the capital project planning develops over the next few months.
All right, that's helpful to know, though, that it's not shown in there right now.
Right.
So thank you.
But my question is, it was in the highway budget, it looks like it's already been taken out.
On this data that DJ just gave to us yesterday, it is taken out, and
Okay,
it's
but
not
it-
added in on this side yet.
Okay.
But that would bring this total up to $4.2 million.
Okay, thank you.
And so I'll redo this, so when we have our overview for provisional budget, you'll see everything in its place at that point.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anything else on the building fund you wanted to visit about?
Not,
Anybody have
nothing
questions on the
specific.
building fund? looks like we can move on then. I wonder if, I don't know where Carol is. I know we were hoping that Erin could be here for this conversation. I know she's in a triage meeting. Okay, I was just wondering if we should move on to vehicles and come back to this.
We sure can.
Carol's standing right here, so.
Move on to vehicles and then come back? Okay, all right, we'll go to vehicles.
So, vehicles are also in the budget information from June 15th. And, let's see, I believe those are in the other requests as well. Let me see here. Okay, that would be slide number 2 from the June 15th hearing, the other requests. And if you recall, when we had our deliberations on June 16th, the proposal from this commission at that time was that we would eliminate the vehicle for equalization. We would, in place of buying a used vehicle for human services, we would transfer one of the commission office SUVs to human services, which would be no cost then to the general fund. And then we would budget for a new SUV for the commission office at $34,000. The purchase of the Explorer for the jail was approved, and the purchase for the sheriff's office of the patrol vehicles and investigator vehicles were also approved. And I've got those numbers scheduled into that means of finance adjustments, so we'll be able to look at that when we get further on into the agenda. And then, as DJ stated this morning, he's withdrawing the vehicle request for the highway fund. There will be one $250,000 item that will be, it's really a carryover from 2020 into 2021 to complete one of the tandem trucks over 2 years instead of one. So his equipment budget will go down to $250 for 2021, and he's projecting a decrease for 2020 as well.
Questions on vehicles?
Good.
Okay. All right, should we go back to personnel, Carol, or do you want us to keep going? We wanted Erin to be available as we kind of work through these grant-funded positions. Erin, are you on the phone?
We could
Okay.
still jump to outside agencies.
Okay,
if
perfect.
you're-
So we'll go to outside
So that would
agencies.
be item 4F on today's agenda. And there were a number of adjustments that were discussed during deliberations on the 16th. So this is a revised schedule of outside agency requests. And we'll just start up at the top. The two largest, overall, the adjustments that were discussed would reduce our outside agency funding by $42,200. The biggest adjustment is for IVC housing, where we've moved to per diem pricing instead of an annual contract rate, and that's going to generate savings of $53,000. And then the other new item for 2021 would be $5,000 to fund mental health court. And so that's further down on the list. Then also during deliberations, Commissioner Benninga suggested that we budget 2% increases to any of those agencies who had requested increased funding over 2020. And so the impact of that is a little over $3,100 for ambulance. And then the total for all the other agencies, you can see here, I think it's about $2,700 total. So all of those items in combination would be a reduction of $42,200.
Questions for Kim on that?
What would, if I may,
Of
the
course, yeah.
impact of a 2% adjustment, having a problem with equity or fairness here, if you ask for money, you're getting it, but if you didn't, you're not, like, Glory House asked for money and they're getting an extra $100, it's not even close to what they asked for, but, I
Right.
mean, if we did the 2% increase for all the outside agency under donations, if we did just across the board a 2%, what would the impact be?
Some of them wouldn't need that 2%.
It'd be about 2% on 21,000, so
$400?
$400. The other item here that I probably should draw to your attention is the request from Lutheran Social Services. They do get an allocation from the Domestic Violence Fund, but in it, they had requested an additional 21,000 over and above that allocation too, so.
And the reason I just bring up the 2%, I mean, it's hard to argue that an organization like, Lifescape or some of these other groups that, they don't see at least a 2% increase in their budget every year, and they didn't come to us and ask for a 2% increase. Those that did, we're gonna give it to. Those that didn't, we're not. So, just putting it out there, the 2% across the board. Unless there's one that we want to pull out specifically because we don't feel they need 2%.
If I may.
Commissioner Barth?
Obviously, I like to advocate for the ambulance people, and I think, this is budgeting. We have to have a budget. I think this isn't a bad number. But I think one of the things that might put the ambulance folks a little more at ease if we could give a 2-year deal to them so that they don't suddenly drop to 10,000, which, the stability of having a similar amount every year, I think, is important to those people. And, I, for one, would like to see more, but, if we do 2% and keep it as the same number or a 2% increase next year, I think that would give them a little less heartburn when budgetary issues come around. And I don't know what we want to do, but when we do the licenses, maybe we could give them a number. You're licensed for 3 years. This is where we will go with you. And as we know, that whole issue of ambulances is still sizzling someplace.
I think we'd have a hard time guaranteeing funding in the future. Just I don't think we can bind future commissions, but I think we could, we've got a track record for being pretty consistent. And we did reach out to the ambulances. They were comfortable with the current equal funding that they get right now. And I know that they did say that they would, we would all like, for budgeting purposes, if our revenue sources would guarantee us some fund. It certainly makes make our budgeting easier too. But I think that we could certainly, I don't think that right now we have any inclination to cut their funding, and that I think our track record would show that it would remain equal or rise just slightly. I think that would be a fair assumption on their part.
Thank you.
As to Dean's comment, I can certainly understand, and I don't think there's an agency on here probably that doesn't do tremendous work for our community. I do struggle a little bit with giving people increases that didn't even ask for support, provide any supporting information about why they might need that. Not that all the ones that have asked for increases have provided dramatic information either. And I mean, and honestly, we're just talking about so few dollars in the overall budget for anybody that I'm not sure that anybody's going to notice whether we gave them $100 or not, an extra $100 or not. I personally would prefer to fund those that asked for it, provided some documentation for why they needed it, and let folks know in the future that if we're going to give increases, that you need to apply and explain why an increase is merited.
And that's a valid reply. It just seems to me that some agencies got lucky because they asked this year.
No, there's no doubt about that. Anybody else have comments on that?
I think the conversation that we had a couple weeks ago was about, frankly, getting off the dime literally and using it as a placeholder to fill the line item need that we have as a county commission on what we can afford, and not micromanaging the independent issues of other concerns, unless somebody has a strong feeling about changing the formula, which I have no problem with. I think we're going to have to review each of these line item by line item to come up with a formula that's going to cost $200. It frankly makes no common sense to do that.
So you're comfortable leaving it the way it is? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
No, I'm open to, if somebody wants to specifically target one of the agencies as something that they're concerned about, I think we ought to hear that, but the real issue is the bottom line is not going to make that much difference. If we want to transfer from one agency to the other, that's fine.
I hate to say it, but I think Commissioner Benega is right.
Hate to say it.
Anything further on that? If not, I think the consensus is to just leave it as is and move on.
That's fine.
Okay, so Craig's pushing buttons on the phone, so I think that means we're likely moving back to staffing requests.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Okay.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound to continue. Please enter the meeting password followed by pound. You are in the meeting now. There are 2 participants in the meeting.
Aaron, are you with us?
I am. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
Quiet.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for joining us. I know you have a busy morning.
Hello.
So I think where we are is talking about grant-funded positions, which is how Erin got invited to the party. And I'll let Kim kick us off.
Okay, I've jumped to item 4D II. It's the last item under 4D. And this is a summary of all the MacArthur grant. It's a proposed budget for the next cycle of grant funding from the MacArthur Foundation. And it kind of gives you an overview of what the total costs of the covered programs are, what the general fund commitment is associated with those, and then what is being grant funded. So if you look at this schedule, we've got 2 positions that we're proposing be grant funded for the next 2-year cycle beginning in 2021. The pretrial coordinator, half of that FTE, and a case manager in human services, half of an FTE. So you can see the total budgeted cost is $109,000. 54,000 of that, the responsibility of the general fund, 56,000 being the grant-funded portion. Then we've also got some professional services. We've got a contract with USD to provide project director, data coordinator, and community engagement services. And you can see the full contract amounts of those. The general fund is paying for 1/2 the cost of the project director and the data coordinator. And then you see the remaining grant funding on those. So of the total $388,500 in professional services, the general fund is covering $94,500, and the grant will fund $294,000. So that's a total grant funding of $350,000, and that grant revenue is included in our current revenue projections. One other item of note is that pre-trial coordinator, our general fund is paying for 1/2 of that position, but we do have a contract with Lincoln County that is also helping to subsidize the cost of those pretrial services. And we've budgeted $17,500 for providing those services for Lincoln County as well.
Is this document on Dropbox?
I'm sorry, we had a late change to this document, so it's probably not on your Dropbox copy. It's on Dropbox right now, but it probably wasn't there when your iPads were uploaded. I apologize, I should have explained that going into it.
Okay. Questions for Kim? I find these very confusing. I don't know if I'm the only person or not, but.
If I may, so with the grant, when it runs out, are we liable for the additional $350,000?
I can speak to that, I think.
Okay.
So, no, the hope and the plan is that these are community positions, and that, I mean, USD isn't ready to get rid of their positions, and some of these are linked with the triage center, or the link to the link. And so it's a community project and not just a Minnehaha County project. Does
Thank
that
you.
answer your question?
Helps a lot.
So I'm wondering how this document necessarily, I wondered this when I was looking at this stuff this weekend. How does this document coordinate with the document that's entitled Staffing Requests, Grant Funded Positions, Partial Full Grant Funding? Was this document updated to reflect the update on the MacArthur grant document?
Well, you'll see that, you'll see the $31,535 for the caseworker matches exactly. There's a little bit of a difference in the amount reflected on the staffing request for the pretrial services position. That represents 25% of that pretrial services, but because our actual contract with Lincoln County covers more than that 25% share, so that's why this analysis looks a little bit different.
So when it says in bold on the other spreadsheet.
On the other spreadsheet.
When it says in bold, the request is to continue, I'm looking at the human services, for example. Request is to have MC general funds cover 0.5 FTE for 2021 and the full FTE for 2022. Is that the 0.5 FTE for 2021 is coming out of our general fund?
That's correct.
And the other 0.5 is coming out of MacArthur grant money?
Yes.
Okay.
But we can let Erin speak to this a little further. Her recommendation was that we move towards funding these positions within the general fund by 2022, funding those in full.
So Erin, I mean, my recollection is this is different than the conversation you had with me prior to our budget hearing with Commissioner Heiberger. At that point, that these were all gonna be 100% grant-funded positions at the top part, the pretrial coordinator, the caseworker. Is that not correct? Did something change? That's what I'm trying to figure out. When we had a conversation out in the hallway, she said that they were all gonna be MacArthur funded for 2021, as long as we took over the position in the sheriff's office.
No, I'm not sure of the documents you're looking at, but no, there's always, and if there's miscommunication, but no, these positions have always been only half funded. It's just that we were a little bit behind, or we waited a while to hire them, so we used 2 cycles of grant funding so we could pay for the full FTE the first year. So these have always been at partially funded positions.
So the funding is the exact same for 2021 as it is for 2020.
Correct, for those 2 where it's
Yeah.
part-time funded. It's just that the reason why the full FTE has been covered this first full year of employment is because we were behind a year in spending. So you're able to use the first year of spending and the second year of spending to cover the full FTE for that first year.
So really, the funding is not the same. We had savings because of a delay in filling the positions, so the grant funding did cover virtually 100% of the cost of the positions, but now when we move into the next cycle of the grant is only gonna cover 1/2.
Okay. So these are positions that we've already authorized. No. See, this is way confusing.
You've authorized them through 2020. And the reason they're showing up on your sheet is because we're looking, of course, at budget for 2021. So we just want you to have a good sense of grant positions moving into the future. So the request for 2021, that's why there's so many comments, and I apologize, but there's so many comments on the right-hand side to help explain really what the difference is if you're approving them for next year. So far, all those 3 positions at the top are only approved officially through the end of 2020.
And if we approve them this year, then they're only approved through 2021?
Correct.
So it does get really confusing, but I thought where we were last time was that the corporal was approved. That was the sheriff's position, which has been in his budget for a couple of years, that he was going to do. We were just fortunate enough that the MacArthur grant covered that position. And then the human services one, we did not continue, we had decided at this point not to continue funding, or not to add budgeted money to that. Am I correct? The human services caseworker,
That's still in the budget.
okay. And then,
Because we have the grant revenue in the budget.
right. And yes, so that's still in the budget for this year, and the thought was if the money comes through for the next cycle, that person would be covered through 2021. And so that was where we were leaving that. And the pretrial person is funded through the end of this year, and that one, we fund half. And we were looking to fund that half going into 2021. Aaron, did I say that all right?
Why don't we, okay. Aaron, did you hear?
So it's somewhat, just to, is what you said is for 2021, that one pretrial coordinator position and one alliance position is 50% funded from MacArthur, for sure.
Yep.
99% likely, because we do have to put in our application for the next 2 years. But otherwise, yeah, that was the plan. But that's what was said.
So that we would fund those 2 positions, the pretrial and the alliance one, at 50%.
Right.
And the corporal was a full ask from the sheriff's office.
So the way the chart is broken out now, the 2 positions at the bottom, the sheriff's office jail, sheriff's office patrol, those two we approved. And so then the pretrial coordinator position.
We approved funding half of that position.
So we approved to fund it at the current level.
Yes.
Is that a true statement?
As I recall from our previous conversation, the reason we broke this chart out is, well, there's a couple reasons. These are all the grant-funded positions that currently exist. That second half has funding that ends in 2020, and they were requesting those positions to continue entirely at the cost of the general fund. And those two you did approve specifically last time. So the ones at the top, our positions where funding ends in 2020, but the opportunity for either partial or full funding exists for 2021. With pretrial, there's really no change for funding from 2020 to 2021. Still, it's half grant funded now, and it'll continue to be half grant funded in 2021 if the grant is approved. For the caseworker, it's currently 100% grant covered because of that delay, and the request is for 2021 that the general fund will pick up half the cost, and the other half will continue to be grant funded. In the state's attorney's office, there's still 100% funding for 2021 through the JJR and the CJS block grant.
I'm going to add one more. For the caseworker in the human services, correct me if I'm wrong, if the grant doesn't come through for that position would be eliminated because we have an open spot in human services to fill that spot. Have I got that right?
If the grant isn't approved, you could choose to eliminate the positions. And right now, from a staffing perspective, yes, I mean, it wouldn't result in laying somebody off for that position. They would transfer the person to a regular vacancy.
And what action would be required by the commission for that to occur?
What my recommendation would be is this is a budget process. You know, if you approve them for the budget and you approve them contingent upon securing of grant funding, have the issue revisited in October when you know where your grant stands and make decisions about funding for 2021 then. Kim, would you disagree with any of that or have any other thoughts?
And Erin, you think the funding levels will be known in October of 2020?
Yeah, I mean, the way we're writing it, because we have to justify the next 2 years under two main things, which is maintaining the change that was accomplished during the COVID, and then focusing on community engagement and racial and ethnic equity. And I'm confident I'm about 99% sure that what we're requesting will be approved. Now, there's a small chance they could ask us to change a few things, but we'll know for sure in October. The grant is due in mid-September, and then the MacArthur board has to approve it, so we should know in October for sure if the plan we submitted is approved or if we have to make amendments.
Carrie?
I guess my only question, just for my own purposes, is does that grant application require commitment from the commission to go forward with the funding for both 2021 and 2022?
Right, I would need to write in, what the plan is, because it looks really good already. They have a lot of their big focus too is, assuring that some of the work that gets done is sustainable. So the fact that the commission already has, funded one of our positions and is requesting, continuation of two, I think looks good. So we would need to know what the plan of action is from the commission in order to write that into the grant. Since you guys are the grant applicant, I don't know that a letter would be needed other than just noting it in the application that this is the direction the commission has gone.
So you're saying that we would have to, in September, we have to tell you that we are going to fully fund a position in 2022.
Which is the corporal.
No, she's talking about the caseworker and the pretrial coordinator, right, Erin?
No, I'm saying like right now, you guys have approved, funding the one in the sheriff's office, the case.
The corporal.
Right,
Project
but you're saying in the
manager and
grant, in your application that you're writing, we have to commit to MacArthur that we're going to fully fund positions in 2022.
if that's the if that's the direction the commission wants to go, we don't have to put commit, but it would be willing to consider, would probably what I would say, because you guys, you never know, you can't commit future, dollars or whatever, but that would be, I would write in whatever is decided during this process.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Commissioner
Aaron,
Heiberg?
Aaron, I'm going to ask another question of clarification. So going forward with the grant, this is confusing because I'm getting confused. We have, as a commission, approved the corporal, which shows that we are committed to moving forward. So that is what our commitment is, that we're moving forward. And so the pretrial and the caseworker one, we would be putting in our budget that we would half fund them. If the grant money goes away, we're not committed to them to continue to fund those two positions. Correct? Because they've got no hold on us if we,
They don't have control. If for some reason the grant funding doesn't come through or something changes, I mean, you're not tied in. It's a philanthropic foundation that isn't going to come after you if your budget comes down. It's just, with any grant application, this is our best. This is what the commission feels comfortable with, knowing everything that you know right now.
Kim?
Aaron, this is
Reason
Kim.
funding doesn't come through, or the second year something doesn't happen, we would write in a request for change.
This is Kim, Aaron. I just want some clarification then, because I thought, my understanding was that in this next 2-year cycle, the funding for the caseworker and the pretrial services would only extend through 2021, and that by 2022, the county would have to assume responsibility for the full cost of those positions.
Right, that would be the most ideal option because it demonstrates sustainability, and the county take on, tiny chunks at a time to make the work, if it's successful, sustainable.
so that's not a decision until 2022.
But she
Well,
wants to
if
write
we
it in
accept the grant
in
this
September.
year,
Right,
It's for 2022.
exactly. The way and I'm sure there's an income offset on this for the grant someplace. But as I understand it, and maybe I'm more confused now, but 2021 is at 50%. 2022 is at literally 0% based on the application that we submit this September, which could or could not be approved.
that's correct.
So my gut at this point tells me that we'll have to make a decision in September whether we're going to do the 2022 and 2021. If they decide not to fund it, then we're just going to back everything out. Because I don't know that I can make a commitment for 2022 based on the fact that we don't know where our funding's going to be and what our priorities are going to be for personnel, correct?
We won't, we don't enter contracts.
No, this is asking us to enter into a contract now for 2022 when we don't know if we're going to get 2021 funding, correct? Or we'll get half, but potentially, but then we have the full responsibility. It's no different than some of the other grant fundings that we have, is we get the startup dollars, and then after a year or two, then it's our function to take over the
Does that-
operating cost.
Does that contract have an appropriations clause like any other of our contracts where
Well, it's a grant, it's not really a contract, so it's,
a promise to pay or a commitment to fund?
Right. It's a grant application, so if it's not approved, it doesn't commit anything. And they work with governments a lot, understanding that. So the grant application is based on this year's budget approval. If you guys approve that, those two FTEs will be partially funded. And for the second cycle, what I would recommend is you consider approving, if it's working, the rest of the two positions. And that's how, because either way, no matter what direction you guys want to go, you never know, what 2022 will bring. And you can't future commit, and they understand that. So
Aaron, we're not committed.
Based on budget and what you need.
Aaron, we're not committed by our application to automatically say in 2022, we're going to keep pretrial, because if the numbers and the data don't come back that pretrial's doing us any good, we're not committed to a
Right.
position that we can't fund. So that is not part of the
Right.
job application, that automatically we're committing to 2022.
Right, there's no automatic, right.
So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, you know, we have our questions answered about the 2021 budget. And I think what this is teaching me is that when this grant comes forward for approval, that we need to really carefully think about what we are saying in those grants. It's very easy in these grants to think it's kind of free money, and it always sounds like a great idea because it's, you know, worthwhile causes that we would like to be able to pursue. But in reality, we then can get into this situation. And my guess is not only will the grant application say that we will, you know, fund some of these, but there's probably some other new position that it's suggesting that MacArthur grant fund for us because of further things. So I think we have the information we need, I do anyway, for approving the staffing request for 2021. Aaron, this has just been helpful, and I think that we need to have, you know, bring the commission along as you're working on this grant so that we all understand what it is that we're committing to, and it just can't be brought in on the day that we are supposed to approve it. So, any other comments along those lines?
You got it, Madam Chair.
Right.
I guess my thought process at this point is 2022 is all based on, frankly, the outcomes of what the grant's going to provide to court systems and the judicial systems to prove that it's worth the investment.
Yep.
And at this point with pretrial, we don't feel like we have enough data, and that's why they were willing to pay for those positions going forward again, because because of everything that's happened, there's just not been enough data to make those decisions sound.
All right, so back to these positions. Is there anybody who is uncomfortable funding these grant positions for 2021 under the criteria that's established here?
Are they
I'm okay
already
with it.
included in the cash applied number that we worked on?
They are,
They are,
they
okay.
are.
Okay,
Next.
so we're good on the grant-funded positions. Anything else on staffing that we needed to talk about? Okay. Is that Kim giving us a summary of what we've already decided, or? Okay. And then you'll talk about payroll and matrix after that.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so this is just a brief summary for you of what you did authorize, or you tentatively approved during the last budget hearing. Right now, you have tentatively approved the paralegal for the public defender and a correction systems operator for the sheriff's office and the jail. And those are the only two full-time positions that you approved for 2021. You did approve 3 other changes. And that's what you see in that second box below. And these are all reclassifications this year for other staffing requests. So you approved a reclassification of a deputy sheriff to a sergeant, a senior deputy public defender to a senior trial attorney, and then a current paralegal to a new classification of paralegal supervisor. And those 3 reclassification requests total about $15,000.
Any questions about any of that? All right.
And then if you want me to jump to the matrix adjustment,
Do you want to do payroll accrual? Oh, no, Kim's doing
You wanna
payroll
do
accrual.
that?
You can do the matrix adjustment. We've kind of skipped all over the place, so we'll let you
All
do
right.
matrix, and then we'll have Kim come back up for payroll.
and just a summary of that, what is currently in the payroll budget is the 2% adjustment that we've talked about during previous budget hearings, and that's for any position that's paid on the matrix. The ones that are off the matrix are predominantly those elected officials, which you talked about today, earlier, for 2% as well.
Questions about that? All right, so now we get Kim back to talk about payroll accrual, and then I feel like I've done a blackout on my bingo card.
That's
Got the
not
top
on here.
half of it done.
Is it not on here?
the payroll accrual.
Payroll accrual is,
It's on the agenda.
It's on the agenda. We can jump back to the chart we had for the June 15th hearing. So the budget overview. Slide 5. Is that right, or is it 15? 15, sorry. 25. Slide 25.
Now I do feel like I'm playing bingo.
card is full.
Yeah. Okay. So, we talked about adopting an accrual method of accounting for our payroll. In past budget years, we've basically been recognizing our payroll expenditures as of the pay date or on a cash basis. And so if you look ahead to December of 20, and because of that, in 2020, we were faced with budgeting for 27 pay periods instead of the typical 26. And so if we could adopt an accrual method of accounting for payroll, we would avoid ever being faced with budgeting for an extra payroll in any future years. But there is a cost to that, because if you look ahead to December 2021, our last payday falls on the 30th of December, and that includes hours worked through Friday, December 24th. So if we adopt this new method of accounting, we're going to have to recognize an additional 7 days of payroll expense. And we estimate the cost of that to be about $700,000. And that is, it's $750,000 countywide. About $700,000 of that would be in the general fund, the rest in the highway fund and the 24/7 fund. That is an estimate, and we are currently working on a detailed payroll projection that will quantify that at the employee level, and we will have that for you by the time we bring the provisional budget forward for your review. But it is a one-time cost, and we projected that by 2028, when we'd be faced with that extra pay period, the cost of that could be as much as $1.9 million. So it's a $700,000 cost now versus that 8 years from now.
And that's included right now in our,
That's one of our adjustments, which we'll go to the whole list of adjustments in just a minute.
questions for Kim? Comments? Commissioner Karski?
I'm in favor of it. You know, it's kind of like funding a retirement plan. If you're not fully funding it, why are you even doing it? So we got to fully fund our payroll.
Anything else?
I would just say that the $700,000 is the total appropriation adjustment that we're making primarily. 95% of it's in
It
the
is.
payroll accrual, which is not cash. It's an accrual adjustment. And I don't want to make this messy, but if at the end of 2020, we have savings of something around that, we can make that adjustment then, rather than waiting to 2021.
Good point. Good point.
Correct?
Make it early?
Correct.
That's a great point.
Yes, you can.
It's,
Yep. That's
as long as we can do it within the limitations of our current budget.
Exactly.
great.
But the tricky part is that every department budget would have to be able to absorb that additional cost. But we could, I guess we could do some and not all, get us most of the way there.
You can make those at any department level that you want.
Right.
As long as you know what the accrual dollar amount is, it can be done.
That is true.
Good point.
All right.
For
anything
those
else?
people not familiar with the term, accrual is one word, not two separate words. It's not a accrual adjustment, it's an accrual adjustment.
Good one. Real adjustment to actual.
All right, anything else on that? Okay, so we have a break built into the agenda right now. Does anybody need a break right now? Are you guys comfortable?
We're almost.
Can we
we
get
keep
another
going?
bingo card?
Yeah. If everybody's okay going, then I'd be in favor of keeping it going. All right, so that takes us to opt-out dollars, cash applied, Kim?
Okay, so we're gonna jump back to the very first document we looked at this morning, and it's this cash applied analysis. And again, I'll just run through all the adjustments that we've talked about today and at the last budget deliberation. We do have a couple new items at the bottom, but as Gerald's mentioned, the $700,000, that's at the top of the list. The cost of the 2 new positions in the jail and the public defender's office, $123,000. The reclassifications for $15,000. We talked about the elected officials, and that's gonna be about $12,500. That's not on here right now, but we'll do a little math in our heads for that. The outside agencies, again, summarizing all those adjustments, the reduction to IVC housing, the addition of mental health court, and then 2% increases on the ambulance funding and the other agencies that requested increases. Okay. Then we jump to equipment. We're removing the request for vehicle for equalization. We're removing the request for a used vehicle for human services and instead going to transfer a used vehicle from the commission office. And then we added a vehicle for the commission office. There's a small reduction in equipment because of the attorney position that was not granted in the public defender's office. We've got a $14,000 adjustment to the MacArthur grant expense as a result of adjusting the 50% funding for the positions and the other professional services. There was a $14,000 impact to those changes after we met with Aaron about those. And then lastly, the jail came forward with an adjustment to one of their service agreements for the security system at the jail. They're going to change the term of their contract, and it results in a $31,000 savings. So the impact of all of this was $769,000 plus the $12,000 for the elected officials.
Can I ask, so the MacArthur grant expenses, is that towards a position? Is that where?
That's for professional services for the USD contract was a big proportion of that, but then there was another $160,000 for other contracts that haven't been defined yet.
Okay.
That's gonna be part of the whole proposal that Aaron will be putting together.
Okay.
So those $769,000 in appropriations budget bring our total appropriations up to $67,513,000, which again results in a cash applied of $5.1 million, almost $5.2 million. And our target cash applied was $5.4 million. So we're below that maximum recommendation for cash applied. And again, and this will be, it's gonna change by $12,000. And whatever the, once we get the payroll accrual number finalized, there'll be a little movement because of that. But this basically summarizes where we're at today.
Questions?
With this at this point?
Anybody uncomfortable? I think we have a big thanks to Kim and the auditor staff and Carol and Carrie and everybody in this room. It's a lot of hard work.
Definitely to the department heads for
Yeah.
being very thorough and very conscientious about their budget submissions.
All right. So, do you want to talk about the provisional budget, Carol?
Where do we go from here? The Final review will be on July 21st. You'll have a briefing on the budget with the adoption on July 28th of this year. That will be the provisional budget. We do not have to have any other discussions in July because we are not needing to go out for more opt-out money. As a matter of fact, you guys have done a phenomenal job of not using any additional opt-out dollars. We're staying at the fiscal year 2020 budget level. So at this point, we're not going to plan any additional budget hearings. If you have a need to do so, please let us know, and we will do this. The next time after the provisional budget you would meet will be the first Tuesday after Labor Day. That is a statutory required date for a public hearing on the budget. And during this time, there's a little bit of fine tuning that Kim and Vicki will be doing, mostly in payroll. Am I correct on that? Mostly in payroll, with adjustments for people who've left and been hired and retirements and how those changes have affected. There's usually a small change that comes forward at that time. So, and then at the end of September is when you will approve the final budget for fiscal year '21.
Commissioner Barth?
And we can't adopt the provisional budget on the 21st? Do we have to wait?
You can, it just says it needs to be done by June 30th. It's not the last day of June. It's the day, July. It's the day before the last day of July. You can do it whenever
Can I
you
do
want
it
to.
today?
No, we don't have all the numbers.
You could just, we'll look for direction on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, so this is opportunity for public input. Anybody here? Public input? All right, if not, I would declare the budget hearing adjourned.
Good job.
Thanks to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you to the auditor's office staff. Without you, I do not know where we would be.